Who is Alice Paul?
Who's who?
Who on earth knows that?
Don't know.
A woman lifestyle leader.
Alice Paul was born in 1885 on her family farm in New Jersey. She was raised as a Hicksite Quaker and taught many values, including gender equality and the importance of education. Though the Paul family was wealthy, Paul and her siblings were given many responsibilities on the farm. At a young age, Paul was exposed to women's suffrage movements through meetings that her mother would attend. Alice Paul graduated from her high school first in her class in 1901. She then attended and received degrees from Swarthmore College and University of Pennsylvania. After her graduation at University of Pennsylvania, she went abroad to England to study sociology. It was during her stay in England where she was exposed to militant strategies of English suffragist movements led by Emmeline Pankhurst. The Pankhursts' motto was deeds, not words. They believed that suffrage could not be attained through words and speaking. It could only be attained through actions. During Paul's stay, they partook in window smashing, heckling, and rock throwing. The Pankhursts believed that blaming the current political power on women's inability to vote would be effective in attaining suffrage. During Paul's stay, she personally smashed over 48 windows and was arrested and imprisoned on several occasions. She joined many of the movement's members in a planned hunger strike, in which they were brutally force-fed. This tactic gained the English suffrage movement a great deal of media attention. In England, Paul met Lucy Burns, who was a paid organizer for the British suffrage movement. When Paul and Burns returned to the United States, they both had a common goal in getting a federal amendment for suffrage. Back in the United States, Paul was appointed head of the Congressional Committee by Carrie Chapman Catt, the president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. The Congressional Committee worked towards a federal amendment, while the rest of NASA worked towards a state-by-state allowance. The Congressional Committee organized a march in Washington, D.C. to gain national attention to the suffrage movement. The event coincided with President Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. Paul and Burns then severed their ties with NASA and created the National Women's Party because NASA didn't want to focus its efforts towards a federal amendment. Like the Pankhursts, the NWP blamed the current political power, Woodrow Wilson, on women's inability to vote. The NWP held silent sentinels in front of the White House and held up banners targeting the president. These gained a tremendous amount of media attention. This was accepted and ignored by the government up until the United States entered World War I. At this time, the picketers were criticized for being unpatriotic during wartime. Many of the suffragists were arrested for such things as obstructing traffic. They were met with violence, and many of the members were sent to the Occoquan Workhouse, a prison in Virginia. At the prison, Paul adopted another strategy she learned through the Pankhursts: staged hunger strikes for media attention. These hunger strikes led to brutal force-feeding. This tactic gained nationwide attention to the suffrage movement and a lot of sympathy. After the suffragists were released from prison, there was a spotlight on the movement. Woodrow Wilson addressed the problem and showed support of a federal amendment.
The 19th Amendment.
He shall not pass. I have no clue.
I don't know.
I have no idea.
19th Amendment. Who on earth knows that?
The House and the Senate passed the 19th Amendment in 1919, and all that was needed was state ratification with a 3/4 majority. Considering that many southern states were opposed to women's suffrage, the ratification of the 19th Amendment came down to Tennessee in 1920.
2,700 last month.
1922. It was in the 1920s. I forgot the year.
1960.
in the 1960s.
35.
In the 1940s.
In August of 1920, many activists went to Tennessee to urge the House to vote either for or against suffrage. After a second roll call of the votes, there was a tie, 48 for and 48 against suffrage. The ratification came down to Henry Burns, the youngest member of the House, who was initially opposed to suffrage. Midway through the vote, he received a telegram from his mother urging him to vote for suffrage. On August 18, 1920, with the vote of Harry Burns, Tennessee ratified the 19th Amendment. 6 days later, the U.S. Congress ratified the 19th Amendment.